Hi, how are you? And welcome to the latest episode of Freeworld News. Just want to say that it's Ramadan at the moment. Ramadan, for those of you who don't know, is the ninth month of the Islamic calendar and is observed by Muslims all around the world as to commemorate the first revelation of the Quran to Muhammad, according to the Islamic belief. So this will involve fasting and it's a month of fasting and various other things. So how does this kind of relate to, we've got quite a few Muslim customers, and obviously the faith is extremely important to them, but with dried fruits and nuts being such a valuable source of nutrition, as we were discussing last week, there's probably a popular increase in eating that kind of food during this month, right?
Right, yeah. Well, you just have to look at the structure. What is Ramadan actually about? During Ramadan, as far as I can see, acts of abstinence, in other words, you don't eat during the day, you can only eat during the night, are considered to be a form of worship. Also, charity is considered to be a form of worship. So you'll find a lot of Muslims looking after their poorer relatives, or sending presents, or giving people jobs, etc. They do exchange presents, and presents are usually dried fruit.
Right.
So this marks a period of significant increase in consumption in all the Muslim parts of the world, notably the Middle East.
Yeah.
And the fast itself is broken by eating a date. So there's huge consumption of dates, and we were literally talking about millions of tons of dates. So it's a huge period of consumption, and also people aren't allowed to work during the day, to eat during the day. And this means that if Ramadan coincides with a harvest period, I should mention at this point that the Muslim calendar is a purely lunar calendar, which means that every year Ramadan will start 2 weeks earlier. A couple of years ago, this coincided with the harvest of apricots in Turkey, where people are already generally working 16 hours a day.
Yep.
They have to work at that particular amount of time. It becomes very hard to work, so sometimes even the harvest collection can be affected. Processing, everything becomes hard to do. People find it hard to work. So what's interesting this year, of course, is that patterns of consumption seem to be changing. I saw this article that you showed me, which was about what people are buying in Egypt for the Ramadan shopping, if you like.
You have just imposed sanctions on the import of hazels, which I guess is a political political issue.
We don't really understand why they do that, but the fact is, the stuff in the market is about $30 a kilo for walnuts, for hazelnuts. And what's happening is that people, of course, can't afford this, particularly at this time of strife in the Middle East. And the consumption patterns are changing. People are using peanuts and raisins rather than apricots and almonds. These patterns of change of demand may have long-lasting effects, because it's hard to see how people would go back.
Yeah. Right.
So it's of interest, and of course it's a period of Ramadan really is about consideration of what it's like to be poor, and there is a lot of strife in the world to be thinking about right now.
Right, so just before we end that topic, just a little bit more about the history of it. So the fasting, the month of Ramadan, was made obligatory, was made compulsory during the month of Shaban. And in the second year after the Muslims migrated from the Mecca to Medina, so it's highly important commemoration for them. And fatwas have been issued declaring that Muslims who live in regions with natural phenomena such as the midnight sun or polar night should follow the timetable of Mecca. So it's a completely different routine and everything. And so it's
a serious problem if you can only eat at night, and you'll have to live in Iceland or something.
Yeah, right.
Where right now in Ramadan
or
there
Russia,
probably isn't any night. When do you eat? But anyway, that's Ramadan.
So also, what we're going to talk about next is a little bit about Greek exit. So now it's becoming increasingly likely, almost guaranteed, that Greece will leave the euro. Recent developments suggest that the conflict between the Syriza party and the IMF are heightening. Greece is facing basically a full-blown banking crisis after a meeting of Eurozone finance ministers, for example, broke down yesterday. So it's basically bringing the prospect of a Greek exit from the Eurozone a step nearer. Do you think the Greeks will leave the euro? I mean, they've got 12 days to repay this large debt to the IMF. And
I think the fact is that they haven't got the money to pay back. So
okay.
On Monday, that's when this will be coming out, there's a final meeting, a final chance for them to do it. And actually, since they haven't got the money to pay it back, the only thing that could happen apart from a Grexit would be for them to put a moratorium of, say, a month on, give them another month to find the money. But I don't know how the market would take that. I think the market would just take that as can kicking. The IMF have said basically, if it's paid a day late, it's too late.
Yeah.
So it's a question of whether the ECB will lend them more money so that they can make their first payment. It's starting to look like this is either an incredible piece of brinkmanship, but either way, there doesn't seem to be a real solution. So I think the Grexit is getting fairly likely. What's interesting, though, is that the euro is actually quite strong. It's gone to about 13 something, up to 1.13, 1.14.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's maybe the ECB itself is supporting the euro by buying it. Maybe the large net short USD position is being covered on a stop loss basis, and that means that people are giving up on the bet against the dollar, and are just covering because it's greed turning into fear.
Sure.
So that's possible. I mean, people have got very bored with the whole thing, really. But certainly it seems to be the case that there is a lot of capital flight going on, which means that people are going to the banks in Greece and taking out all the money they can, all the euros they can, because if the first thing that will happen is that the banks will fail, which means that when you go to collect whatever funds you have in the bank will be closed, and you won't be able to get them, which is kind of what happened in Argentina.
So Ramadan, Greece, that's all from us today. Have a good weekend, everyone.